It's Monday, August 12th, 2024. Is Joe Biden having regrets? What Democrat VP candidate Tim Walz's military chaplain has to say about him? And what or whom exactly is the Trump campaign? Next on the AM Update. Joe Biden was interviewed by CBS over the weekend, and he discussed his decision, I guess we'll call it, to drop out of his re-election bid.
Look, the polls we had showed that it was a neck-and-neck race. Would have been down to the wire. But what happened was a number of my Democratic colleagues in the House and Senate thought that I was going to hurt them in the races. And I was concerned if I stayed in the race, that would be the topic. You'd be interviewing me about why did Nancy Pelosi say, why did someone, and I thought it'd be a real distraction.
So he basically underlines there that there was a coup. There was a coup. People said, hey, you're not doing us any favors. Off with your political head. Now listen to this. This is an interview that Nancy Pelosi had recently with the New York Times op-ed board regarding that letter that Joe Biden signed allegedly a few weeks ago announcing he's dropping his bid for re-election.
I didn't accept the letter as anything but a letter. I mean, there are some people who were unhappy with the letter. Let me say, some said that some people were unhappy with the letter. I'll put it in somebody else's mouth. Because it was I don't even know, it didn't sound like Joe Biden to me. It really didn't. So
What? That's Nancy Pelosi saying the letter that Joe Biden allegedly released that Sunday a few weeks ago didn't even sound like Joe Biden to her. Compare that with her words recently also on CBS, on an interview with Leslie Stahl, where she seems to be holding something back there as well.
Please tell us what you told President Biden to persuade him to step aside.
Well, I've never shared any conversations with the President of the United States publicly, no.
It's said that he's furious at you. Is he?
Well, he knows that I love him very much.
I understand that you don't want to own this. But it is so well reported that you were the leader of a pressure campaign.
No, I wasn't a leader of any pressure party. Well, let me say things that I didn't do. I didn't call one person. I did not call one person. I could always say to him, I never called anybody.
Yeah, there was a coup. And basically Nancy Pelosi is saying that without actually saying it. That was so odd. Like, nobody is talking about, especially that interview you just heard with the New York Times where she said, yeah, that Biden letter didn't even sound like him at all. If you needed any more confirmation whatsoever that this was actually not in the best interest, or at least not the first choice of the Biden family, well, there you have it. The Harris-Walz campaign issued a statement to NBC News late last week saying that Tim Walz misspoke regarding his claim of having carried, quote, weapons of war in war. Appears he misspoke for 19 years. Here is 19 years ago as a congressman talking about his time in the military.
Having been one of those that came back, we were in support of OEF, but sitting in there with OIF veterans when we came back.
That's Operation Enduring Freedom, by the way.
They showed us the horse whisperer and told us to be nice when we went home. And that was the extent of it. And that was in 2004. Now, I'm proud to say that because of the people sitting in here and people who came before me, things have changed over the last 4 years. They have not changed enough. But Mr. Kennedy is following and moving something forward that the late senator from Minnesota, Senator Wellstone, advocated so clearly, mental health parity, and this issue of destigmatizing mental health, of understanding. And I being in there and knowing as a first sergeant, know exactly what you're saying, and watching as people aren't trained on this, that there is there's a discrimination that goes against a soldier who has the courage, the fortitude, and as you said, the insight to admit this. So
that is Tim Walz 19 years ago when he was a congressman talking about the veteran mental health crisis, making it sound as if he was in the midst of Iraq, he was in Afghanistan, he was in the thick of everything, when the reality is one of his deployments, at least one of his deployments, was in Italy. There still seems to be a lot more smoke with this fire. It seems like every day a new video is coming out of Tim Walz over the years misrepresenting his military service. And now the Harris-Walz campaign, Freudian slip, has issued a statement saying he's been misspeaking for the last 19 years. Speaking of these matters, the chaplain of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's Field Artillery Regiment said there's no excuse for the Democratic VP pick to have abandoned his National Guard unit before a critical deployment, not even running for Congress. Retired Captain Corey Bjertness, now pastor in Horace, North Dakota, told the New York Post, quote, "In our world, to drop out after a warning order is issued is cowardly, especially for a senior enlisted guy." Bjertness, now 61 years old, was the chaplain for the 1st Battalion, 125th Field Artillery, of which Walz was Command Sergeant Major, before retiring in 2005, 2 months before the unit deployed to Iraq. Walz has said he did so to run for Congress, and he was elected the next year. Bjertness said of Walz's decision to quit, quote, "Running for Congress is not an excuse. I stopped everything and went to war. I left my wife and 3 teenagers and a 6-year-old, and I was gone for 19 months. Thomas Behrens, the Command Sergeant Major who replaced Walz, previously told the New York Post of the Minnesota governor, quote, he had the opportunity to serve his country and said, "Screw you" to the United States. Again, this story I don't think is going anywhere. And now what, or I guess a better question is, whom is the Donald Trump campaign? Donald Trump has very few rallies planned. He had one over the weekend in Montana, but other than that, he seems to be sitting around on Truth Social. This weekend, his topic du jour was, among other things, trashing podcast superstar Joe Rogan for saying he likes RFK Jr. So what exactly, or exactly whom, is the Trump campaign? It seems like the Trump campaign is J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate. He's the one who is on message. Now, consistently over the last couple of weeks, he's the one talking about the actual real issues, taking Kamala Harris and her ilk to task, actually going and meeting with the media and doing interviews, as he was this weekend. On this clip, I want to play 3 clips for you over the weekend. He was interviewed by Dana Bash on CNN, talking about Kamala Harris and the childless cat lady comments. Listen to this deftness of rhetoric.
You've now asked me 3 questions about comments that I made 3 years ago. I wonder what Kamala Harris thinks about the fact that she supported policies that opened the American southern border. I wonder what Kamala Harris thinks about the fact that she lied to the American people about Joe Biden's middle facility for the office. You are interviewing me, Dana, because I respect the American people enough to sit down for an interview.
I appreciate that.
Kamala Harris has been the nominee for 3 weeks. She hasn't sat down for a real interview.
Believe me, we are asking. You're not going to get a disagreement there.
But the point is, Dana, you've got me for 15 minutes or however long you have me. We should be talking about public policies that matter. How are we going to lower inflation? How are we going to reduce the cost of food and housing? How are we going to close down that southern border? We've talked so little about that. We've talked a lot more about a sarcastic remark I made 3 years ago. I think we should talk about the issues that most Americans...
And that's how you do it. That's actually good politics. That's the the vocational aspect of politics right there, at least in the rhetorical sense. And you see that J.D. Vance has that down pat, so it seems. Here's a little bit longer clip where J.D. Vance talks about his comments on family and what he thinks needs to be done to support and encourage family formation. This was a clip from CBS Face the Nation.
You've been talking about the concern about the low birth rate in the United States of America, which is well documented. You said people without children should pay higher tax rates than those who have children, and the U.S. should look at lowering income tax rates on women who have multiple children, and you pointed to Hungary as a model for that. How do you plan to implement that policy?
Well, it's called the child tax credit, and we should expand the child tax credit. If you think about what the child tax credit does...
So you and the Biden administration agree on the child care tax credit?
Well, we think it should be bigger. I think President Trump and I believe in an expanded child tax credit, but we also, importantly, want to actually get this thing done. The child tax credit has languished, thanks to the Biden administration, because Harris has failed to show fundamental leadership. Chuck Schumer's been unable to get it through the United States Senate, and we want to have a more pro-family policy. Now,
there was just a vote on this. You know that. And you weren't there.
But Margaret,
it was a messaging bill. I'll give you that.
It was a show vote.
I'm with you on that.
And if I had been there, it would have failed.
So tell me specifically what you want to do to expand the child care tax credit, because it's like $2,000 per kid right now.
Well, I think one of the things you can do is make it bigger per child. I think we'd love to see it at a higher dollar value. And again, President Trump and I have proposed that. I mean, look, I'd love to see a child tax credit that's $5,000 per child, but you, of course, have to work with Congress to see how possible and viable that is. We've also proposed legislation, Margaret, it to end this practice of parents getting these surprise medical bills where they go to the hospital, they have a baby, they chose an out-of-network provider, and they come home with unexpected bills. I've actually sponsored legislation to end that practice. So we have a whole host of pro-family policies that are out there. And again, on the Harris administration, I got to push back against something a little bit, Margaret, because when these comments where I said parents should pay lower taxes via the child tax credit came out, the Harris administration immediately jumped and said, we disagree with this. The Harris campaign said, we disagree with this. So did they want the elimination of the child tax credit, or were they just being careless in responding to remarks that I made 3 years ago? I don't know. They should clarify it, maybe in an interview with you, but of course Kamala Harris refuses to do interviews with anybody.
So that is J.D. Vance. Here he is once more with Dana Bash on CNN, talking about a very similar issue. Listen to this.
You do criticize, as you just did, the Democratic Party for being anti-family.
I do.
You called out Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg in particular. Kamala Harris has 2 stepchildren. Pete Buttigieg and his husband have adopted twins. Do you recognize them as parents and more broadly as being part of families?
Well, of course I do, Dana. I mean, you know my life story. I was actually raised. I was raised, but Dana, I was raised. One of the first people that I gave a hug to after my RNC convention speech was my stepmom, who's been an incredibly important person in my life.
So she's not childless.
My kids call her Mamaw. Of course she's not childless, but again,
you called her that.
The criticism. I certainly did not call my own stepmother childless.
Kamala Harris.
I criticized Kamala Harris for being part of a set of ideas that exists in American leadership that is anti-family. I never, Dana, criticized people for not having kids. I criticized people for being anti-child. And I do think that Kamala Harris has made some bizarre statements. She has said things like it's reasonable not to have children over climate change. I think it's the exact opposite message we should be sending to our young families. I want to expand the child tax credit. I want to stop those surprise medical bills. I want to make housing more affordable so that if you have a young family, you can actually afford to put them in a home. And I think that it is unfortunate that so much of our public leadership has become anti-family. One final point on this, Dana, if you go back to the COVID era, one thing that really frustrated me and motivated some of these comments is we were at a point where we were kicking kids out of school. We were masking 3-year-olds and putting the masks back on them, even as they were trying to rip them off at school. I think that if we had more people who took the right perspective and had a little bit more understanding of how little kids actually operate, we would not have made so many of those mistakes during COVID.
So he wants to expand the child tax credit. He wants to stop surprise medical bills. He wants to make housing cheaper. And he doesn't want to repeat the mistakes of COVID, like school closures and masking toddlers. I don't know about you, but if you're just kind of a normie family that's not been given over to the spirit of the age, that's not been given over to communist ideology, that's a really hard line of policy to disagree with. Now, I don't know how many of those normie households actually exist, but that's a really, really difficult line of attack, not only of this current administration, but of a vision for the future that's hard to turn down. Now, here's the point where I would actually play some clips from interviews from Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, but J.D. Vance is right. They have not done any interviews. They've just been going to rallies and saying the same speeches over and over again. They've not done any sit-down interviews to this point. I'm not sure how much longer they can get away with that, but I guess they're going to find out. And now a few odds and ends before we get out of here on a Monday. A California man was sentenced to 20 years in prison for his role in the January 6th, 2021 events at the U.S. Capitol. That's the second longest sentence yet in hundreds of prosecutions of those riot participants. David Nicholas Dempsey pleaded guilty in January to 2 counts of assaulting police officers with dangerous weapons, landing him a sentence only surpassed by Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio's 22-year sentence. A boxer with male sex chromosomes took the gold medal in women's middleweight boxing at the Paris Olympics despite public uproar denouncing the rules that allowed the unfair competition. Iman Khalif of Algeria won a decisive 5-0 decision on Friday over China's Yang Liu. Also at the Olympics, the International Olympic Committee determined that American gymnast Jordan Chiles must return the bronze medal she won in the Paris Paris Olympics floor exercise after her score was improperly judged. The IOC said the bronze medal was being reallocated to Romanian Ana Barbosu after the International Gymnastics Federation said it would respect the center arbitration for sports decision on the issue. The CAS avoided Childs' score after it was determined that U.S. coach Cecile Landy's appeal was made outside the 1-minute window for appeals. Childs' score was changed by 0.1 of a point, which allowed her to get into third place and win a bronze medal over Barbosu. And that'll do it for today. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.